Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This video should hopefully be a short video because I'm talking about my new book. Yes, for those of you who don't already know, I am writing a book on the Islamic dilemma. For too long now, we've had Muslims refuse to engage on the Islamic dilemma. We've had them try to convince Muslims it's not an issue. Meanwhile, you have tens of thousands, if not at this point, hundreds of thousands of Muslims trying to get an answer for the Islamic dilemma. How do they solve it? How do they still argue the Quran is a consistent book and isn't contradicting itself when all of the evidence shows that the Quran affirms the previous scriptures that the Christians and Jews had in the 7th century and simultaneously contradicts those scriptures in major ways? Worse yet, this dilemma has been such an issue for Muslims, particularly da'is who are trying to give dawah to both non-Muslims and Muslims at this point, that there's been a split in the Ummah, there's been a split in the Muslim community over exactly how to tackle this issue. The answer is not only not straightforward, it's not even the same answer anymore, and it varies depending on who you ask. For example, if you ask John Fontaine, Yemeni and others, you'll get one response, but if you ask Dean Responds and others, you will get a totally different response that assumes totally different things and leads to totally different conclusions, and Muslims can't decide on which approach should they go down. Now, ultimately, both these approaches are really bad. I think John Fontaine's approach is worse than Dean Responds. Sorry, John. But they're doing everything they can to form sophisticated and in-depth approaches to tackling this issue because it's affecting a lot of Muslims' faith in Islam, because Muslims don't really seem to have much of an answer. But they're doing their best. And they're scraping the bottom of the barrel, and they're coming up with all sorts of explanations that perhaps to a naive Muslim who hasn't learned the dilemma or investigated it, it might sound convincing enough. And since Muslims have a habit of not wanting to engage on the Islamic dilemma, and they discourage engagement with the Islamic dilemma over and over again, you join any Muslim live stream, they're going to tell you, don't listen to anyone who brings up the Islamic dilemma, don't listen to them, because they're more concerned about discrediting the argument than they are with addressing the argument. Why they do that? It's because it's a lot easier to discredit something than it is to give a solution to something, especially when it's the Islamic dilemma. I wanted to tackle that, and I thought one of the best ways I could tackle this issue is if I just wrote a book with everything I have learned in the last 6 months, everything I've read, everything I've experienced through debating Muslims on this topic, everything the Muslims themselves say and their objections and their attempts to try to reconcile the Islamic dilemma. I want to put it all into a book. I want to make sure that it's the best I can make. It is everything I know, everything that scholars say about this, because yes, there is scholarly thoughts that intertwine with the Islamic dilemma, everything that Muslim da'is say, and respond to all of it in a very detailed fashion, but also in a way that helps people present the argument polemically. I'm looking at it as kind of a study guide for non-Muslims to be able to learn the argument to a good, solid degree, where you handle every objection without issue, where you give concise, detailed responses to anything that the Muslim might say in response to your argument, while also being fair to every side and presenting the data as neutrally as I can, and apply the polemical side only once we've established certain facts from the data. This is a project I've been working on for about 2 months now, I think. So far, I have a word count of 30,000. I have some amazing people who've been helping me along the way, and they deserve a good amount of credit, actually, for their work in acting as copy editors of this book so far. The book is written in a way that you don't have to be a Christian to read it, and I wanted to make this a key thing of the book. Something that I say that I've always been passionate about when I make the Islamic dilemma argument is it doesn't require you to be a Christian. You don't need to be a Christian to make this argument. In fact, it's a Muslim trope when they talk about the Islamic dilemma to keep focusing on the Christian. Whenever the Islamic dilemma is made, they think there's a Christian behind it, and that's not true. But because Christians have been so on the forefront of this argument and absolutely key to its development over the last 10 or 20 years, ignoring all the historic figures who worked on the Islamic dilemma, but you know what I mean, in the modern day, with the invention of the internet, Christians have been at the forefront of this argument. But that's not by design. It really is the fact that Christians have just been the ones who use it so often. But there's nothing stopping anyone else from making this argument. Atheists can make the argument, spiritualists can make the argument, Jews can make the argument, Hindus can make the argument. You can be from any persuasive as long as you are a non-Muslim, and you can make this argument. So I've written it with the assumption that the person doesn't no theology, particularly Christian theology, in a very in-depth level. Rather, it's a very basic overview of things that you will find in the biblical text that have the benefit of not being hyper detailed and holistic. And, in order to establish a doctrine, you have to read multiple verses from different parts of scripture to establish it. Rather, these are just basic, quickly identifiable facts that can be shown in very few verses. This also helps avoid one of the pitfalls of the Islamic dilemma, which is when you're giving the argument, the Muslim wants to pivot to any other topic they can possibly pivot to, because ultimately it's better for them if they pivot. So, for example, you're presenting the Islamic dilemma, you mention the Trinity, and all of a sudden they only want to talk about the Trinity and not the Islamic dilemma, because what would they rather talk about? Well, they want to talk about the Trinity because they have a dawah script prepared for that, whereas the dawah script for the Islamic dilemma, let's just say it's still very much in production and the people writing it can't even agree on what to write. This is why the contradictions that I point to in the book are ones that are clearly identifiable. For example, Jesus being the Son of the Father and Jesus identifying the Father as God clearly establish a theological point that is spread across all the Gospels and said very explicitly in many verses. It's not something that Muslims can deny as in our scripture. It's obviously and explicitly and plainly and in all four Gospels mentioned. Another approach that I want to take with this book is to build up facts from primarily the Quran. The reason I'm doing this is because, first of all, I want this to be something that is applicable to everyone within the Muslim tradition. Whether that's orthodox or heretical, I want this to be an argument that can best be used effectively to anyone in the tradition. It doesn't matter if they're Shia, it doesn't matter if they're Sunni, it doesn't matter if they're Quran only. I want to tackle all of these groups in one swoop and pull the floor from under all of them. Part of having that goal means that I cannot realistically, anyway, given my lifetime, write something that can fully analyze every source from every tradition. That's not something I'm going to take on because I would be here until I'm about 80 something. I also find that every tradition has the same thing in common, namely the Quran. They all believe the Quran is a divinely inspired book and the word of Allah, therefore I will take that as a basis on which to establish the Islamic dilemma. That doesn't mean I won't reference tafsir and I won't point interesting interpretations or relevant interpretations to the particular verse I'm talking about in the book, but I'm not going to make an argument from just the different tafsirs, mostly because whatever tafsir you bring up, Muslims will generally just disregard that particular tafsir in this instance, no matter what you do. So you just end up chasing your tail. And I think it offers Muslims a kind of breathing space to feel like they can just approach a tafsir with a pick and choose kind of attitude, pick what they want, disregard what they don't want, even from the same exegete, and feel as if they've somehow given a reasonable answer. Rather, my approach is going to look at the Quran holistically, but also allowing the Quran to speak for itself. Shabir Ali would be very proud of me. I do think that although the Quran is fundamentally an incoherent book based off this argument, I do think that the Quran is clear in certain areas where it repeats the same idea multiple times, like the idea that the Quran is confirming our scriptures. I don't think that is in any way unclear. I think that the Quran makes that very, very clear. Likewise, I'm not going to start looking into hadith or sirah material, or at least not with an emphasis on this, because again, what hadith are you going to? Is it Shia? Is it Sunni? What about those that don't even accept hadith? It just seems that that will be less useful in comparison to just sticking with the material that every Muslim agrees with. And just to make a note, my way of arguing this would be that if a Muslim tries to appeal to other sources outside the Quran, I would just point out that they are appealing to sources that contradict the Quran, and that I shouldn't take a source that contradicts the very thing I'm talking about seriously, because ultimately that would just show that the Muslim doesn't actually believe in the Quran, they fundamentally believe in something else. My book will be addressing the three main approaches to the Islamic dilemma that Muslims will offer as a rebuttal. So that's John Fontaine's approach, where the Injil and the Torah that the Quran affirms and contradicts are actually not our Torah and Injil, or the Torah and Injil that was widely used in the 7th century, but rather some mysterious other book to which we have no evidence for. I'll also be dealing with Dean's view, namely that the Torah and Injil are what we have today, and they do contain wahi, revelation, at least through meaning, but that it's only aspects of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. It's only aspects of those which contain the wahi. Lots of it has been corrupted, and the Quran is only confirming the scripture in a general sense. And lastly, the more widely held view by most Muslims is just that the Quran is confirming our scriptures, but not the contradictory parts, because the Quran clearly makes a distinction, clearly saying that yes, it does confirm, but yes, they do contradict. That's something that's found in the Quran apparently. This is what most Muslims probably believe. I'll be tackling that for you as well in detail. I'm probably going to have this book self-published. If anyone can find me a Christian publisher that would be interested in publishing this book, that would be awesome. I'll be very open to that. Leave a comment down below if you have any thoughts or suggestions. I would love to hear them. What I'm hoping is when I publish this book, it's something that's substantial enough and solid enough that 10, 20, 30 years down the line, it's still considered to be one of the best works on this particular topic, the Islamic dilemma. Yes, I aim high. But given there's not much material in the modern context that tries to present this topic in a very detailed way, especially from a generic non-Muslim perspective, while also being clear about using it as a polemic, I think that is woefully underserved, and I'd like to be the person that serves it. Another thing to mention, David Wood is also writing a book on the Islamic dilemma. From the chats I've had with David is going to be looking into much more of a wider audience to present the argument in a much more a surface level, but in a way that's probably much easier for the average person to grab. My book has a ton of footnotes in it, so that's kind of where these books are going to separate. David's book will be the book that you get to learn what the Islamic dilemma is, learn how you can present it, learn how you can show Muslims the issues, and then my book is the book you go to next when you realize that David's book wasn't enough. I'm only kidding. Only kidding, David. My book will be the book you go to when, if you're a super nerd and you're like Mike Winger and you're not satisfied with the David Wood book, you want the Wingerling edition, then I'm the Wingerling version. In terms of when this book is going to come out, I really want to think it'll come out by the end of this year, but something tells me that's not realistic. I think even once I've wrote the book, I then need to get it published, and I think that's a whole thing in and of itself. I honestly don't care about how well it does. That's a bit of a weird thing to say. I don't care about the financial success of this. What I care about is that it has enough of an impact on both Muslims and non-Muslims that I've been able to say to myself, I've actually managed to help people learn the Islamic dilemma in a really in-depth way. I've managed to make some good arguments that people are presenting and will still be presenting decades from now. That being said though, this is something I've been working on for 2 months now. It has taken a ridiculous amount of my time, and if you guys do buy it, I would really, really like that. Even if you're just doing it to support me, that would mean a lot and it would really help. Or if you're buying it because you want to present the Islamic dilemma in the best way you possibly can and you want to be an expert, dare I say, on the Islamic dilemma, then you should totally get the book. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I've talked enough for now, and I'm hoping this isn't going to be an absolute pain to edit. Hopefully it shouldn't. But yeah, if you guys have any thoughts or anything you'd like to ask me down below in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer. Also, you can email me at chris@speakerscorner@gmail.com. My email is down in the box below. God bless you all, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.